Hi, this is Lou Pulsfer to talk about conventions and convention activities that definitely are of interest to game designers, Unpubs, Protospiels, and publisher speed dating. A Protospiel appears to be a word that's a combination of prototype, an unfinished game in this case, and the German word for game. It dates back many years to informal gatherings of game designers, such as Alan R. Moon's Gathering of Friends. Designers get together, they play each other's prototypes, and they provide advice and support. Most Protospiel conventions are only for prototypes, though people occasionally play published games. The most well-known Protospiel, which started in 2001, occurs annually in Michigan, but there are many more, and here's a URL for that convention, or it's easy enough to find it by searching. More recently, we have the Unpub convention, which stands for unpublished. In many ways, there's not much difference from Protospiel, except that most of the testers are not designers at the Unpubs, and so it tends to be a bigger gathering of people. Perhaps there's also more focus on bringing in publishers to pitch to, so that the designers can pitch their games, but I can't say that for certain. Well, the original Unpub convention is in Baltimore. Unpub 5 in 2015 had 92 designers and 1,027 attendees. Unpub 6, April 8th to 10th, 2016 in Baltimore. There are also Unpub minis that are held at various locations, such as in Durham, North Carolina. There are other conventions like this, such as Prototype Con in Kissimmee, Florida, and you can see my discussion of regional conventions, which included Prototype Con. Now, let's say something about target audience. Other game designers, by the very nature of what they do, are not your target audience. They're not going to be representative of your target market, although they may have the same preferences. It's in the nature of being a designer. On the other hand, they're more likely to have good insights into your game. They may even be able to suggest fixes that you can adopt, whereas the average playtester is primarily useful for saying what doesn't work for them rather than suggesting fixes. Now, in something like Unpub, where non-designers randomly choose to play your game, but may not actually be in your target market, you can still learn from them, and you maybe can even adjust your target market when you realize who your game appeals to. Then we have an activity that occurs at a convention, publisher speed dating. As far as I know, this originated with James Matha, who is a tabletop game shop owner, a game publisher, a Kickstarter expert, an entrepreneur, and kind of a curmudgeon as well. A venue is arranged, usually as part of a convention. Designers sign up to display a game and pitch it for 5 minutes each to publishers. Publishers are then signed up and they rotate around the tables. And games have certainly been licensed for publication in this way. Now, this can take place, of course, at any game convention. At Gen Con, they have a different name for it, something like First Exposure. But and at Gen Con, there may not be publishers involved. So the Gen Con activity is more like an Unpub. So there are different levels of this and different people being involved, but they can all be useful to a designer. Now, what does a designer do if he's in one of these publisher speed dating things? Well, you set your game up as it might look sometime in mid-game, and you tell the publisher, keep it in mind you don't have much time, what the game represents, including how many players and the length, what the player actually does, which is the largest part, because games always come down, or in many ways, to what the player does, and then how the game ends and how a player wins, assuming there is in fact a win. Do not focus on mechanics, is my advice. If you start out with, this is a worker placement game, or this is an auction game, or this is a deck building game, I think you're already behind with many publishers, not all of them. Some publishers may focus on mechanics, but most publishers realize that they have to appeal to a target market, and mechanics are not generally the primary method of appeal. In general, games are about their effect on players, not about mechanics. So, even as it gets harder and harder to license a game to a publisher, there are more and more support groups for designers, which is what these conventions and publisher speed dating amounts to. It also becomes easier every year to self-publish because of advances in technology, if you don't mind just breaking even or perhaps losing a little money. So the prospects of becoming published are much better than they used to be, but the prospect of actually making much money from it is much worse than it used to be. Thanks for listening.